Bernstein again. Big opening. Pass 5. Pass 10. Berkel's a man. And he goes all the way to the 15-yard line. 17 yards out the terror.
Welcome back to Believe in Badgers on the Believe Network, presented by BetOnline.ag and Oak Bridge Wealth Management. I'm Matt Perkins, joined, as always, by Badger legend, the Hebrew Hammer himself, Matt Bernstein. Bernie,
yeah, buddy.
How are we doing here on a Friday?
It's good. It's good. I took the day off. Yom Kippur tomorrow.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. With 2 kids, I'm a little nervous. That's why I took the day off. Also, Monday's Indigenous Peoples Day, so daycare is closed. Mike, I did too much talking on your podcast, so I'm excited to do literally hardly asking all the questions and hearing about the matchup coming tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow.
I know, it snuck up on us for sure.
Yeah,
happy to be here, guys.
That is the voice of Mike Broadbent, of the host of the Night Report podcast. Bernie was over there earlier this week with some great conversation. I know you guys talked for a while, but if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you know how much Bernie likes to talk. So we are excited to talk about the matchup between Wisconsin and Rutgers in New Jersey this weekend. Before we get into it, though, I want to remind everyone that we continue to be proudly presented by BetOnline.ag. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything sports betting. Every stat, matchup, breakdown, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during games. BetOnline has the largest catalog of odds on everything from football to the MLB playoffs, NHL, NBA, even political props. You can find them there at betonline.ag. When the game's over, head on over to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with over 150 different slot games. Head on over to the website today. That's betonline.ag to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. And, of course, our main man, Chris Anicetti over at Oak Bridge Wealth Management. We are so proud to be not just partners, but friends with Chris and his team over there. If you are a current NCAA athlete with NIL deals or a pro athlete or future pro athlete, Chris is the man to get in touch with in order to get your money right. Over at Oak Bridge, Chris and his team of professionals create a comprehensive financial plan set up for you to navigate your lifestyle and future market conditions. Oak Bridge does one thing, and that is take care of athletes. They know all of the pressures that you face on a day-to-day basis. Their team will set you up with a bespoke plan to make your money work for you off the field so you can focus on what you do best, perform on the field. Get in touch with Chris on Instagram at OakBridgeWM_Anicetti. That's OakBridgeWM_ANICETE. Or head on over to their website at oakbridgewealthmgmt.com. That's Chris Anicetti and Oak Bridge Wealth Management. Yes, sir. Well, wealth management.
Go for it. Sorry, Matt. Did we finish?
We're good. Bernie, it's all
Mike,
you,
let
buddy.
me ask you a question now that we're talking about Chris Anicetti for a second.
Yeah.
We talked about the NIL. Mike, can you hire money manager guys in college? Are you allowed to do that as a player?
Yes.
I don't see why not. Yeah, I think they're people just like everybody else. So,
man, these kids these days, I feel bad for them. You're your own LLC, right? You're your own business to hire. Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming maybe the teams have lawyers.
And teams have lawyers, kids have agents.
Concepts.
Yeah.
Okay. This will blow my mind. Sounds horrible if I was a kid, but I'd also be rich if I was a student now. So Mike, big game tomorrow. I think this is a what do they call it? Matt, this is a program game.
This is
for both teams.
This is a test. This is an important test for both teams to prove that they have made strides or haven't. Because while neither coach is on the hot seat, there is, I think Rutgers underachieved last year, quite frankly, Mike. And I think they've shown a lot of promise this year. That win against Washington was really nice. Mm-hmm. But, there's definitely still room for improvement, which is, I think, what you would say about Wisconsin. If you're going to sort of sum it up a little bit, it's going to be inconsistency, I think, and maybe a little bit of room for improvement. I think that Rutgers has shown a lot. But I think both the team as a whole and Ethan Kaliak-Manis, who I've had issues with for a long time, but we'll talk about him later. But give us a skinny. What's the vibe then right now in the locker room?
So to touch on one of your points, I also agree that they underachieved a bit last year. 5 of their 6 losses were one-score games in the fourth quarter. The Wisconsin one was more of a backdoor. We scored late, and we were down by 8 or something like that. But we had a 9-point lead over Ohio State in well into the third quarter before we threw a pick 6. So I agree that Rutgers didn't really hit its full potential last year. They thought bringing a quarterback in who can actually complete a forward pass would help this year, which it has. Last week, Gavin had his first hiccup of the season against Nebraska, and we still only lost by 7. Overall, the vibes are high. This is a team that brought a ton of guys back this year. You're talking about the Big Ten's leading rusher from last year, and Kyle Monungai returned. They returned 5 or 6 defenders who we all thought would leave for the NFL. It's kind of strange now, just the general, like, if you have good enough NIL, kids aren't leaving to become like priority free agents or 6th or 7th round picks. They all think they can improve their stock. So I think Rutgers kind of was helped out there, where they had a lot of guys who probably would have went late in the draft on the defensive side, but decided to come back for the final year of eligibility. So entering this season, a lot of prognosticators in the national media were talking about Rutgers as their college football playoff dark horse because of the schedule, how easy it is for Rutgers. And so far, this is exactly, in my preseason prediction, I predicted them to start 4-0, first loss at Nebraska. That's exactly what's happened so far. So I think even for somebody who was probably a little shading towards the optimistic side, this is exactly the season we could have probably hoped for. Like, I don't think anybody would have not signed up for a 4-1 start heading into a 2-game homestand with Wisconsin and UCLA. So I think the vibes are generally high. I think people are a bit deflated by how they lost last week to Nebraska, because that game was there for the taking. I think there was some, we got a little too cute offensively play calling. We had the touchdown that was not called a touchdown that we probably should have asked for a review on. We didn't. We thought we could probably punch it in from 1 yard out in 4 attempts. Spoiler, we didn't. And then we had a perfectly thrown touchdown pass down the sideline in the fourth quarter that a freshman I can't tell you what he did. It was just like, it was almost like his hands rebooted mid-route and they didn't turn back on in time for him to catch the ball. Go look it up from last week. I don't think I've ever seen a worse drop in my 20 years as a Rutgers fan. But overall, vibes are high, and I think there's the ceiling outcome for this team is still there. I think a lot of people were hoping for this like 2006 type season where we have an undefeated record late in the year. I don't think that was ever truly realistic, but the vibes are still incredibly high around the program.
Mike, do you think that Rutgers is coming back onto the map?
I think this year presented an incredibly advantageous situation between the guys coming back and the schedule that we were given. Because before they added Oregon and before they added Washington, they released the schedule for next year, or for this year, I'm sorry. And Rutgers was basically facing the Big Ten East schedule, but instead of Indiana, they were going to have UCLA or USC, one of the two. So it was basically like the same level of difficulty. And so we were all just kind of like, all right, well, I guess the divisionless football really doesn't mean much other than like, beating on the redheaded stepchildren a little harder. But then when that revised schedule, when Oregon and Washington came back, it's like, oh, wait. Everybody that we're facing lost a ton of guys. We're not facing any of the top 4 teams, and we're not facing Iowa. And who could have seen this Indiana breakout? And we're not facing Indiana either. So it was just kind of this really lucky setup for their season. So are we on the way up? I think we are, but I don't think we're ever going to be a team that is regularly winning 9 or 10 games in the Big Ten. I think if we could have like the Iowa model where we're like 7-5 every year, and then we have that 1 out of every 5 seasons we're 9-3, 10-2. I think that's kind of like the realistic outcome for Rutgers. But I don't think we're ever going to be able to, throw the money around that an Ohio State can or an Oregon can. So I do think we're on the way up, but I do think we have a bit of a glass ceiling as a program because of kind of situations outside of our control.
Interesting. Okay, Matt Perkins, let's just jump in. Mike, tell us who's hot. Like, who are we going to watch offensively, and then flip to defense, and then if you guys have special teams. But like, who are we going to see tomorrow, and what do the Badgers need to do to slow those guys down?
Well, you're going to get a healthy, steady stream of Kyle Monungai tomorrow. Kyle Monungai is second in the Big Ten in rushing right now. He's on pace for 1,600 rushing yards on the season, and I think 15 rushing touchdowns, somewhere around there. So I think they're going to get back to the meat and potatoes basics tomorrow, and they're just going to try and run as much as they possibly can. I think the matchup between your guys' run defense and our run offense is probably the biggest mismatch in this game that they'll try and exploit. If you see Ethan rolling out and having to throw 25, 30 times, it probably means that we're not able to establish that run game. Some critical injuries occurred in the recent memory. We lost Brian Felter, who was one of the best guards in the Big Ten, at least grading wise, during the Washington game. He had this non-contact knee injury. He came out for a few plays, then returned to the game and finished the game out. And then I think, early midweek last week, he must have gotten some MRIs, and before the game, he was ruled out for the season. So what was a very strong offensive line unit kind of fell apart last week because they replaced him with a guy who'd never made a start before, in Taj White at left guard, who was listed as a backup tackle. So I don't know necessarily if they were trying to shuffle things around during the week, but if you guys are able to exploit our interior offensive line the same way that Nebraska was, I think that's going to cause problems for the Rutgers run game. But on offense, I would expect him. We do have quite a bit of depth for us, at least. I know Bernie, you were talking about the depth that Wisconsin has at receiver. We kind of have a similar setup where we have a lot of guys who we can trust to go in there and make a play. I don't think anybody is, a Jeremiah Smith type, but, we have a guy in Ian Strong who's made some big catches this year. He was dinged up last week, but he was the guy who came back in the Virginia Tech game and had a 63-yard tunnel screen. Dymere Miller was the leader in the FCS last year in receiving yards, and he's leading us in receiving yards this year. And the third option in the passing game would be Kenny Fletcher, who is a converted defensive end, and he had a lot of success early on in these split zone rollout concepts that Nebraska was able to shut down last week, because I think Illinois ran a lot of the same plays as us in that look. So those are probably the three offensive guys in the passing game, and obviously Kyle Monangai in the running game.
So then let's switch over to the defense. And so what I want to know is what can your defense hang their hat on? We've been doing this segment we call Hang Your Hat on It, presented by Melon, the world's most durable hat. Make sure to go over to melon.com, MELIN.com, and put it to the test yourself. So, Mike, what can this Rutgers defense hang their hat on? Is it, is it the front? Is it the secondary? Where do they excel most?
So if you would have asked me this question after the first 4 games, I would have said, I really don't know, because this defense has really played significantly worse than I expected them to. With all the guys we returned, with the defensive mindedness of the staff in general, I thought this team was going to take a big step up on defense. And up to the Washington game, we didn't. But last week, I'll give them credit. I think they missed 15 tackles against Washington. They only missed 3 against Nebraska. They had, I think, 7 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. They had 13 pressures on Dylan Raiola. We only had 4 sacks all season prior to last week. So I think the defense really was kind of challenged in the week off, or in the week ahead of the Nebraska game, to really kind of get its what together, because they had not played to the standard of the program. So if you're going to ask me what they do well, if you're asking me what they do well based on last week, they did everything well. But if you're going to ask me what they did based on the first 4 games, they didn't really do anything well. They weren't filling run holes. They weren't filling run gaps well. They weren't getting a push on the defensive line. The secondary is missing a ton of tackles. But I think the primary reason for that was the linebackers were both making like their first starts, at least early in the season. They'd played, I think, a combined like 90 snaps in their career prior to game 1. And we have a guy, Tyreen Powell, is coming off an Achilles injury that he suffered in the offseason, who was expected to be the anchor there. And we lost probably the best player on the defense to an ACL injury ahead of the season. That was a linebacker as well, and Mohamed Toure. So I think they're starting to round into form. And I think that the unit in general is kind of a bit of a question mark, because are they more like the team that played last week, or are they more like the team that played the first 4 weeks? We won't know.
So it's funny they mentioned, because at the beginning of the season, I would have said, Bern, that Wisconsin's strength in the defensive side of the ball was going to be their linebackers. And I actually think, though, it's been the secondary for Wisconsin. I think it's been the secondary by a good bit. And I'm interested to see how they attack Ethan Kaliak-Manis, a quarterback against whom they had mixed results during his time at Minnesota, right? They beat him last year, but a couple years ago they lost. I remember just losing to him when he was a freshman. During Calic Manis's like freshman year, he was completing like 42% of his passes or something like that. And Wisconsin still managed to lose. And that was one of the most frustrating losses of my Badger fandom, at least of the last 5 years. I remember vividly. So how has Calic Manis improved from his time at Minnesota to his time at Rutgers? Because, I mean, statistically, he has gotten better. I think the one thing that stands out to me is turning the ball over a little bit less.
Yep.
But what else has he done to, get this Rutgers team moving?
So I think everything has to be taken with with a table setting of last year. We had a quarterback who completed 45% of his passes over the whole season. So anything was going to be a big step up for us. So Athan, I think the first 4 games, he completed like 62% of his passes. Last week, like I said, he didn't have a good game against Nebraska. I'll just put it that way. I think that wasn't necessarily on him last week. He was pressured 19 times in the game. The offensive line, like I said, kind of had a falling out. But I think a lot of Rutgers fans were hoping that the progress that Athan Kaliakmanis saw in his freshman year under Kirk Soraka, our current offensive coordinator, he was at Minnesota previously, would kind of translate to this season, because Athan's sophomore season, they had that guy Harbaugh, their offensive coordinator at Minnesota, who had never had offensive coordinator experience before. The season last year was largely seen as a total lost year for the program. So we were hoping that the progress would kind of pick back up, with a guy he was comfortable with, a guy who recruited him to Minnesota. And it seemed like the early returns were that was happening, because he won the job outright out of the spring, which caused Gavin Wimsatt to transfer. And the early returns for our expectations were, if a guy is wide open on a slant 7 yards in front of you, you need to hit him as a college quarterback. And he's been able to do that. He's been able to open up the deep passing game a bit. He's completed a handful of, 30, 40, 50-yard passes in our offense, which I think we had 2 of those last year all season. So to have 4 or 5 of them this year already is a big step up. He keeps us on schedule a lot more than Gavin. And to give you a kind of example, last year, Gavin would have basically these one read throws where if it wasn't there, he wouldn't really hold on to the ball, let things open up, maybe scramble around a bit. He would just, throw it into the third row of the stands. Whereas Athan, if everyone's covered and he has a lane, he'll take those free 4 yards. Or if, he's getting blitzed and he has that release valve tight end, it opens up, he'll just hit that for 3 or 4 yards. So he keeps us constantly on schedule on offense. Whereas Gavin would just he wouldn't commit many turnovers, but he also would set us up in a lot of 2nd and 10s, a lot of 3rd and 12s, because we would have to run the ball on 1st and 2nd down. So he's kept us on schedule, which I think prior to last week, we were 3rd in the FBS in 3rd down to go on average. I think we were at 3rd and 5.3. I haven't looked at those stats this week, but largely that has been successful. But we're not asking him to split the atom. We're just asking him to keep us on schedule for the most part.
If I was the defensive coordinator for the Badgers, I would make you win throwing the football. And Matt Perkins, I do think our best on defense, I think everyone's improving. I think our D-line has taken a huge step. But I would say we're going to bring run blitzes and pass blitzes, and we're going to do one-on-one, maybe have one guy deep for free. And we're going to give you as much as we can to stop the run and make you beat us on the pass. Because I think your quarterback's kind of like ours. You get them frustrated, you get them moving around the pocket, you get them not feeling comfortable. It's almost, I guess, like any other quarterback. I don't know if he's going to make the plays kind of like Braden Locke that we need to win. So that's what I would be throwing everything at you. Mike, does that sound like a game plan that could potentially win?
I think it could, especially right now, because Athan's been wearing a knee brace. Last week, he looked less mobile than he had in the first few games. Not that he's like Michael Vick back there, but like I said, he was taking those free yards when they were available. So I don't know if he's dealing with something or if it's precautionary, but if he gets a ton of pressure like he did last week, I do think it's going to be a long day for us. Virginia Tech tried this strategy, and again, this was 3 weeks ago now, and he completed 14 of 16 passes in short and intermediate range for 259 yards. So he has shown the ability to kind of, if you're going to try and make us fight right-handed or left-handed, we can do it. But again, that was 3 weeks ago. injuries have happened to the offensive line and to Ethan. So I do think that would be my strategy. I would try and take away the run game and also just force Ethan to be uncomfortable. I think that's easier said than done for a lot of reasons, but yeah, that's definitely what I would try and do if I was the Wisconsin D coordinator.
And Matt Perkins, we got athletic linebackers who, it's like you look at like Van Ginkel, who just intercepted, Aaron Rodgers for a touchdown. That dude was lined up on the line looking like he's going to blitz. I think we can be very creative in guys looking like they're coming, taking 2 steps, getting out, getting in pass lanes, making some, confusing plays. I think we got to do that. Like, we have to have 2 turnovers to none. I actually think, Mike, tell me if I'm wrong. I think we match up pretty good. I think it's like 2 programs in the same place right now. And I do think, I think we could both benefit no matter who wins or loses, but I think the winner's going to benefit way more. I mean, I think, to me, this is a season game, right? Like, if you win this game and then you guys win UCLA, you're all the way up here. If we lose this game and win the next game, I mean, it kind of doesn't matter. I don't know if what that matters, but I think we should say, if you can complete 14 out of 16, all right, good, you guys can beat us then. But if we don't stop the run, we are in big trouble. You're going to control the ball. Like, everything bad could happen if we don't stop the run. I would throw 9 guys at you every play and just have our backs just try to beat you.
Yeah, I think it's like kind of like the trauma surgeon aspect of this. Like, if you get somebody out of a car accident and they're bleeding out of their aortic, their aorta or whatever, but they have a broken leg as well. It's like, well, you got to stop the blood loss before you can fix the leg. And that's kind of like the run game. If you can't stop the run game, you got no chance. The broken leg is not going to kill you, but the blood loss certainly will. Yeah. And for you guys, given how much harder your schedule is than ours, especially the rest of the season, I think this is kind of a more important game for you guys to win than us, because I think you're hard pressed with the remaining the opponents on Rutgers' schedule to not make a bowl, which is what Schiano is trying to reestablish as the absolute floor each year for the program. So I agree that it's probably it's definitely a meaningful game for both teams, but I think it's slightly more meaningful for you guys given the rest of your schedule.
Yeah, that schedule, just going through it again, you guys avoided a lot. A lot. There's no Ohio State. There's no Penn State. There's no Oregon. Like, it is, you get Washington at home. Yes, you have to go to USC. Wisconsin went to USC. I think USC has proven they're a very beatable team this year. And I think that USC is susceptible to the run. Rutgers runs the ball well. Anyway, I want to move back to this game, though. And one of the matchups I'm curious about is what they do with Eric Rodgers on the Wisconsin wide receivers, because the Wisconsin wide receiver room is really deep, but their 2 biggest playmakers come out of the slot, and he's been playing boundary pretty much this whole year. So how do you see? Do you think that they will try to move Rodgers around at all to match up with a Will Pauling or a Trech Kakahuna, or is he just going to stay out there and they're going to figure out the rest? Because he's good.
Yeah, Eric Rodgers is a New Jersey native. He transferred in from Northern Illinois prior to last season, and he instantly became, I think he was the 3rd starter, because we had Max Melton last year, who's now on the Cardinals. He was a 2nd-round pick. They haven't shown, they haven't really followed any receivers. They haven't moved guys for advantageous matchups. He's primarily played boundary, and I haven't looked at the PFF alignment stuff, but in watching games, he's primarily been a boundary guy. Their quarterback 1 this season is Robert Longerbeam, and he actually basically missed all of last week. He only played 3 snaps. He's dealing with a shoulder injury. He was questionable coming into the game, but they actually had their best showing all season. And I guess that kind of goes to show, Bernie, I think you were talking about this, like playing at like 80% football, if you're not feeling right, is just like, you shouldn't even do it. And I think he was just playing at 80%, and that wasn't good enough. Because when we had 3 healthy corners out there, we were playing pretty well as a unit in the secondary. So it's going to be a team, team and scheme kind of situation to stop your guys. We don't have guys who are going to rove around the defense. So I think we're just going to hope that whoever is assigned that assignment at the time can handle both your slot receivers. So I know they're playing really well, and it's sometimes nice not to have guys get hurt, but when guys do get banged up and the backup shows competency, it almost adds this layer of like confidence in the team. It's like, yeah, we got this. You know, you got get right, come back, and you know we'll handle it until you do.
Yeah, yes. I mean, again, our skilled guys are deep. I even think our line's pretty good. But for Wisconsin's offense to win, is it throwing the ball or is it running the ball? I mean, I think what Coach Longo said is we're going to take what you give us. But what do you not want to give us?
So this season, they've shown that they don't want to get anything behind them. So against Washington, for example, we allowed a ton of yardage, but there was nothing that beat us deep. There was a missed tackle that caused Boston, the receiver, to just kind of, you know, drag across the middle of the formation and go up the sideline. But that's kind of been like they talk about not being a bend but don't break defense, but they've kind of played like that in a lot of senses. So they're not going to want to let you guys beat them deep. Braden Locke has shown he can do that in when he's protected. You know, he had a couple deep passes against USC in the first half that went for touchdowns. He had a really good game in the second half against Purdue doing that as well. So I think that's going to be the number one, is not letting him get to that point. And I think the way you don't get to that is by putting pressure on him. But that's probably number one. And number two is don't let, Wisconsin have these big plays with their deep unit of pass catchers on offense.
Bernie?
Go for it, Matt Perkins. Oh, you want me to keep going?
Yeah, I want you to keep going.
Oh, dude, I'm happy to ask 100 million questions.
That's what you're here for.
Yeah. Well, let me think. You usually
while you're thinking about it, Bernie,
up real quick.
Bernie,
yeah.
While you're thinking about it, maybe you need to rehydrate a little bit.
I'm thirsty, man.
You're thirsty? Are you thirsty? I'm thirsty too. I might have myself a little Cherubundy right here.
Stuff is so good.
It's quite frankly, it's been addictive. I absolutely love it. Natural ingredients, no added sugar. Tart cherries are the highest antioxidant fruit or vegetable in the world. Every NFL team, 66 out of 67 Power 4 conference football teams all have Cherubundy in the locker room and on the sidelines to make sure that they are helping support immunity, reduce soreness, increase recovery, and just help get better. So check it out, cherubundy.com for tart cherry juice. I'm into it. Bernie's into it. And we genuinely love this stuff.
I just worked out and I just had it. It tastes so good. It's great. I even take it for hangovers. I don't even know if that's a Cherubundy thing.
I did the other day.
Yeah,
I don't know if we should be advertising that, but I did last Saturday. So, and it was very helpful.
If I drink one beer, I'm too old now, so one beer hurts. Anything one beer plus, I'm like, dude, I need a Cherubundy at the end of the night. So I don't know if that's a good sign or not. It's like that baby drink that I love.
Pedialyte.
Pedialyte.
Yeah. Every
adult knows that drink. All right, so Mike, back to the game, so we can talk about being hungover all the time. How important is the fans? How important is it to get that stadium packed? Has it been packed? I've been there a couple times. It's been solid, but I wouldn't say like the students and everyone has come out crazy. Has that vibe changed?
So I would say earlier in the season, no. The Washington game was the best crowd that I've seen since 2014 against Michigan and Penn State. That was our first year in the Big Ten. That was also the first time we had a winning season in the Big Ten until last year as well. So I would say that it's almost like the Rutgers collective fan base is waking up from hibernation. They've been hurt so many times in the Big Ten. They've had so many quote unquote big games that Rutgers hasn't shown up for. They've had so many times where they're told like, come on out, it's going to be a great game, blah, blah, blah. So I think they're starting to realize, oh, this actually is a good team. Like not diehards, obviously, but there's just so many, and Bernie, this, there's just so many sports and teams you can root for in the area that nobody's going to waste a Saturday to root for a team that hasn't been playing well. So I expect this to be at least close to a sellout. I think if we would have beaten Nebraska last week, it would have been an absolute zoo. But because we didn't, I could see some fans kind of I don't want to go anymore, blah blah blah. But I mean, it should be mostly a sellout. These noon kickoffs are tough to get people in early for. That's been a problem the entire time I've been a fan. So I think by the beginning of the second quarter, it should be basically a full stadium. Now the team's going to have to perform in order for the crowd to get into it. They're not a crowd that's going to, help the team get back from 14 down. So if the team plays well, yeah, the crowd's going to be a factor. If they don't, it's going to be a pretty quiet stadium.
I ask because Wisconsin travels well, and also there's a lot of Badgers in the area.
Yep.
And if you think about it, this is the closest game you can get if you're a New Yorker, if you're almost Pennsylvania, if you're Connecticut, like almost everywhere north of Jersey.
Yep.
This is the closest game by a lot you can get to. Does that have a factor when you run into the stadium as a Rutgers player and you see it's all red and white? I mean, we're all the same colors, but like you hear people booing and you hear other fans cheering for Wisconsin. Like, does that play a mental game at your home stadium?
I think they're kind of used to it at this point. Like when Ohio State's in town, when Penn State's in town, and Michigan's in town, like there's going to be 10,000 of those fans there. Wisconsin's going to show out well. They always have, in my experience, for our games. I don't think it'll be as extreme this year as it has been because it was a lot of, either Rutgers fans not buying tickets or season ticket holders selling all but one game. So I don't think it'll have a huge psychological effect, at least any more than any other game. But obviously you wouldn't want that. You want to limit that as much as possible. But I don't think it'll have a huge effect on the team, to be honest with you.
I'm looking for any psychological wins. Anything, listen, football is a game of like, what did De Niro say? Like inches. It literally is a game of inches. And any psychological, anything that gets you juiced, gets your confidence up. Like you'd run into the Michigan Stadium and you could see the red fans, but there weren't many of them.
Yep.
Right. So I just want to ask, because every time I've been there, I know a lot of people, Wisconsin, go there. A lot of Rutgers have kids that went to Wisconsin, Rutgers, alumni. So it's a mixed bag, I think, when you see it. But maybe Yom Kippur will help you with people not showing up.
I don't know. I think
it help you with me not showing up, Mike. I'm sad. It's like it couldn't be the worst game to be on that date. If it was any other, I don't care. I'm not going to any other games. But Rutgers, I could drive to.
Sure.
Okay, so one of the things I want to talk to you though about, Mike, was sort of like a broader program question, and that's related to the transfer portal and how Craig Schiano has utilized it, because I think that every team has had to adapt, right? Unless you're Dabo Swinney, like every single team has had to adapt to 2024 college football being in a lot of ways dictated by NIL and the transfer portal. There are obviously, like, everyone has a transfer quarterback at this point, so like that's like no big deal. But how has Rutgers utilized the portal? Where do you think they're utilizing it efficiently, or where have they had the most success? And where do you still think that they will need to address in the future, like moving forward, and what's going to be sort of their overall strategy?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a nuanced answer. So apologies for the long-windedness that I already know it's going to come with. So Greg Schiano,
I asked a long-winded question and expected a long-winded answer.
All right, perfect. So Greg Schiano is very, very key. He's keyed in on developing a program, and he calls them, he's talked about time and time again, they're a developmental program. So they primarily want to get guys through the high school recruiting rankings. Now, I think expanded scholarship limits will help in that sense, because you could just take more shots at guys that you might have otherwise, not been able to get because of scholarship limits. So if you look at the last two classes, Rutgers finished 35th last year in their team recruiting rankings. This year, I think they're 21st. So they clearly have money to spend. They don't have as much money as a lot of schools, but they have money to spend in NIL. They choose to focus that money on retention, and they choose to focus that money towards high schoolers because they're cheaper. Now, the transfer portal they have used, I've kind of criticized them at times for not going deep enough into it, but they use it for needs primarily. If guys don't work out that they've tried to develop, or if a very unique situation presents itself, sort of like the Ethan Kaliak-Manis situation, or, New Jersey is a very fertile, recruiting ground. Sometimes kids want to come home. Schiano has kept us really close in a lot of top recruitments. They might not have landed every top kid, but I think it's just as important to recruit a kid hard and to not burn bridges in high school recruiting, because you're probably going to get a second crack at a kid most of the time now with the portal. So they have gone into the portal for offensive linemen. They've gone into the portal for defensive linemen. The last 3 or 4 years, they've been trying to land interior defensive linemen, sort of like Plan C kids or like level C level kids. They're not.
Their defensive linemen are so hard to get.
I know. Yeah,
they are so hard to get.
So they've been trying to be. They've essentially tried to take a Moneyball approach to how they use the portal, because we can't afford to drop $1 million on a kid or $500,000 on a kid. Like, so they've had to try and be very selective in terms of the right fits for the program and for the financial implications of a kid. So I don't think they've gone into it nearly as deep as a lot of programs, but they have utilized it to land quite a few starters. I mentioned Eric Rogers, Flip Dixon's probably our best secondary player when he's healthy. Excuse me. And he came over from Minnesota when he transferred. They've had, last year they had, I think, 3 offensive linemen come in as transfer portal starters. They had, Dymere Miller, the receiver, come in this year from the portal. So they've targeted guys when the right fits are out there, but they don't always have the right fits available to them, I guess.
Yeah, it's been nuts. I think though that Rutgers, to me, seems to have taken advantage, given their financial situation, pretty darn well overall. I've been very impressed with their ability to find guys that at least always seem like program fits, right? I think Wisconsin has done a relatively good job, but there have been guys who haven't necessarily panned out as much as true program fits in terms of culture. And I feel like, at least from the outside, right? I'm not there. I don't know anything about Rutgers. Just from my perception outside, though, is that they seem to very much have established a culture. I mean, that's what you expected when you brought Schiano back. And so how do you see that culture evolving as college football gets even more nationalized? And
Mike, can I piggyback? Sure. On this too? Is it possible to build a program anymore?
So I think that, with how things kind of ebb and flow, I think there might be an inefficiency here in terms of trying to target developmental high school players and, develop them. And by the time that they're of the point where they might start looking elsewhere, you have the money to keep them. Because look how many programs just basically do all the recruiting out of the portal. Sometimes there's no better program to look at this for than Florida State. Look how many guys they landed last year to put together a 12-0 team in the regular season. They tried to do the same thing this year. The results are too volatile. Now they're one of the most they're the biggest laughing stock in the Power Four. So I think the highs and the lows of being primarily a portal program are there. Schiano would rather be hitting singles and doubles than swinging for the fences and possibly striking out. So I think there is an opportunity for an inefficiency in the market by going after 32 kids a class in high school, and you're naturally it's going to be about a 50% at best hit rate for these kids. So if you can just get more at bats with high schoolers and get them, bought into the program, continue to get kids drafted in the NFL, continue to have these success stories like Isaiah Pacheco, like Max Melton. If you can continue to kind of put those pelts on the wall, it's only going to make the program stronger, because you have these things like, listen, he was going to leave too. And then go through that story. It's like, we convinced him to stay. He'll tell you, he'll come in next week. He'll tell you it was the best decision he ever made, sticking around. And I do think the inefficiency is there, because there's not many programs who will do what Schiano's trying to do and primarily go after high schoolers now, develop them, keep them with the NIL funds via retention. So I think what he is doing is sustainable, because I don't think many teams are trying to do it. If everyone's trying to do it, again, I don't think it's going to work. But because there's so many programs who rely way too much on the portal, I think there's a path for success here.
I just think the volatility is what you can never know. It's almost like the stock market. You literally can't know. You get a guy, he's a Jersey dude who's a 3-star, let's say, and you're going to say to him, we are going to develop you to play in the NFL. That's our goal. And you develop him for 2 years, and all of a sudden now he is the best dude on the defense, let's say. He can be like, well, I can go make $1 million somewhere. And there's nothing that says Rutgers or Wisconsin or anyone could pay him. I just asked this question because this is the plan that Wisconsin has set up. Fickle is a program dude, right? My concern is the volatility. You're always going to have guys leave now at this point. you're just hoping those are the guys that aren't your starters or your leaders or your players, basically. But there's no way of knowing that. And then what do you do? If you didn't recruit for that because you're like, oh, we have this guy, then you are saying, I have to go to the portal. So, like, I just think the volatility around all of this is so – it's frustrating. To me, it's annoying. Like, you might watch a guy for a year and be like, oh, I can't wait to be a fan for him of 3 years, the next 3 years, and all of a sudden he's gone.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, how did I buy his jersey? Like, what the heck is wrong with me? But so, like, that's my question is, it's unproven if anyone can build a program during this time. And I'm just worried that I don't know if you can. Maybe it's a bastardized program where like you're always getting portal. I don't know. And then my answer is, do you have enough money to retain these guys? Wisconsin, I don't think has that. I mean, we're Big Cat's trying to buy a QB, Barstool president who eats one slice of pizza. I don't know what's wrong with him. One bite doesn't make sense to me. Eat the pie. He's trying to spend $3 million on a quarterback at Michigan. Like, these are astronomical numbers, but is that the ability to build a program with all these outliers? Like, I guess I was a long-winded. Like, just can this happen?
So I think they can. I think Rutgers also hasn't had a situation where they have a guy who's like first round talent level as a sophomore that now has 7-figure opportunities. I think if they continue to have these program guys who by the third year could leave for like a 6th round pick in the NFL, I think they have shown the ability to retain those guys. And Schiano's now 5 years of being here. I could only point to like 2 instances of guys that left that they wanted to keep. One was Rene Conga this offseason, who is probably their 3rd defensive end. And now he's playing a lot of snaps for Louisville. And a few years ago, they lost a safety in Elijah Clark to Syracuse after Fran Brown left. So I think Schiano, for all of his like Schianoisms and things like that, I think he's kind of like a cult leader of this program. Like, he has these guys 1,000% bought in to what he's selling. And so I think that kind of connective tissue makes it really hard for these guys to leave, especially, if they do come to the staff and say, hey, this is happening, what can you do to work with me? They have worked with guys. So I don't think these kids are going poor. And at the same time, they feel this insane connection to Schiano and the program that has kept them here. So again, if Rutgers ends up with a kid who's a 3-star from Jersey, who has by his sophomore year, Mel Kiper is talking about him as a 1st round pick, I think that's when it's really going to be pressure tested. But for right now, they've done a really good job with the players that they've been able to recruit, developing them from relatively unknowns to NFL draft worthy prospects. I think that's the next stage that we don't really know because we haven't gotten there yet. But for right now, if they continue on this kind of trajectory, I do think that they can keep the program largely together.
Awesome. Well, we are over time now, so we're going to wrap up here. Mike, we can't thank you enough for spending some of your very busy time here with us. Check out Mike on Twitter at Mike B. Bent. That's Mike, the letter B. And then Ben, obviously, will be linking to him in all of the show notes, etc. Check out the Night Report podcast. Bernie was on earlier this week. It was fantastic. So, and thank you, everyone here, for tuning in to Believe in Badgers on the Believe Network, presented by betonline.ag and Oak Bridge Wealth Management. We appreciate your time. And until next time, on Wisconsin.
On Wisconsin.
See you guys.